The crosshairs settled on a shadow that should not have been there. Sergeant First Class Linnea Voss pressed her eye tighter against the scope, her breath slowing to almost nothing as she studied the eastern ridge of the Kringle Valley. 300 meters above the trail, where 143 Rangers would pass in less than 20 minutes, something had moved. Something disciplined enough to freeze the moment it realized it might have been seen. Corporal Danilo Reyes shifted beside her, his spotting scope tracking the same ridgeline. "You see it too," he whispered. Linnea did not answer immediately. She was counting. 1 shadow became 2. 2 became 5. And then she saw the glint of metal where no metal should exist, and her stomach dropped into cold certainty. "They have the whole ridge," she said. "Overlapping fields of fire. 40 shooters minimum. This is a kill box." Reyes swore under his breath. "The column is 15 minutes out." Linnea was already reaching for her radio. "Firebase Phoenix, this is Overwatch Alpha. Priority traffic." She waited for acknowledgement, her eye never leaving the scope. "Phoenix, Overwatch Alpha. We have confirmed enemy positions on the eastern ridge. Grid reference follows. Recommend immediate halt of Ranger column." "How copy?" "Static." Then a voice she knew too well. "Overwatch Alpha. This is Saber 6 Actual." Captain Derek Breslin sounded irritated rather than concerned. "We swept that ridge yesterday. Intel shows it clear. What exactly are you seeing?" Linnea kept her voice level despite the urgency clawing at her chest. "Saber 6, I have visual on at least 40 enemy fighters in prepared positions. They're set for ambush. Request immediate halt of column." The pause that followed lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 hours. "Voss," Breslin said, and she could hear the dismissal already forming. "We have drone coverage. We have ground scouts. We have 100 Rangers who cleared that route this morning. Just one sniper sees something everyone else missed. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have witnessed moments when someone tried to warn others and nobody listened." "Sir," Linnea pressed, "I am looking at them right now. Eastern Ridge, 300 meters above the choke point. If the column enters that valley, they will be walking into a massacre." Another pause. Then Breslin's voice came back harder. "Maintain your position, Sergeant. Continue observation. Do not, repeat, do not deviate from assigned overwatch. Saber 6 out." The radio went silent. Linnea stared at it for a moment, then slowly set it down. "He is not stopping them," Reyes said. It was not a question. "No." Linnea returned to her scope. "He is not." The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the thin mist that clung to the valley floor. In 11 minutes, the first Rangers would enter the kill zone. In 12 minutes, the shooting would start, and there was nothing she could do about it from here. She thought about the last time she had failed to act when it mattered. Syria. 3 years ago. The faces of 4 Marines who died because she hesitated 1 second too long. She carried their photograph in her rifle case. She looked at it every night before she slept. Corporal Evan Thayer had been 22 years old. He had a sister in Ohio who still sent Linnea Christmas cards, not knowing that Linnea was the reason her brother never came home. Movement to her left. Linnea tracked it automatically, then relaxed. It was just Tarek, the young Afghan interpreter who had been attached to their unit for the past 3 days. He was crouched behind a rock, looking hungry and exhausted. She reached into her pack and pulled out her last protein bar. She had been saving it for the extraction, but extraction seemed less certain now than it had an hour ago. She held it out to Tarek without looking at him. The interpreter hesitated. "Sergeant, I cannot take your food." Linnea said nothing. She simply continued holding it out until he accepted it. When he tried to thank her, she was already back at her scope, scanning the ridge where death waited with patient discipline. Reyes watched the exchange. He had been her spotter for 8 months, long enough to know that she never wasted words, never wasted motion, never wasted anything. The fact that she had given away her last food told him something about what she expected from the next few hours. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. Linnea was silent for a long moment. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters settling into final positions. They were good. Professional. They had done this before. Somewhere up there, A commander was watching the same valley she was, waiting for Americans to walk into his trap. "We do our job," she finally said. "When starts, we give them everything we have. It will not be enough." She knew that. Reyes knew that. But it was all they had. 8 minutes now. The first dust clouds were visible to the south. The Ranger column approaching. 143 soldiers who trusted their officers, trusted their intel, trusted that someone was watching out for them. Linnea Voss was watching, and she was the only one who saw what was coming. She checked her rifle one more time. The M110 was clean, precise, an extension of her own body after 6 years of partnership. She had made shots with this weapon that other snipers called impossible. She had missed exactly one shot that mattered. The column entered the valley mouth. She could see the point squad now, young Rangers walking with the careful alertness of men who knew this place was dangerous but did not know how dangerous it was about to become. "Reyes," she said softly, "when it starts, I need you to spot for the machine gun positions first. If we could take out their heavy weapons, the Rangers might have a chance to find cover." "Copy," he said. His voice was steady, but she could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his scope. 6 minutes. The Rangers were spreading out now, maintaining tactical spacing as they moved through the narrow passage. Good soldiers, disciplined, doing everything right. It would not save them. Linnea watched the eastern ridge, watched the shadows that contained 40 men with rifles, watched the moment approaching when the valley would become a killing ground. And she waited for the first shot that would change everything. Linnea made her decision in the space between heartbeats. She pulled back from her scope and began breaking down her position with quick, efficient movements. Reyes stared at her. "What are you doing?" "Getting closer." She collapsed her bipod and slung the rifle across her back. "From here we can provide overwatch. From down there we can provide cover when the shooting starts. Breslin ordered us to stay put. Breslin is going to get 143 men killed." Linnea checked her sidearm and began moving toward the goat trail that wound down the ridge. "You can stay if you want." Reyes was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she heard him packing his gear behind her. "Like how I'm letting you go alone." They moved fast but careful, using the terrain to mask their descent. The goat trail was barely wide enough for one person, carved into the rock by generations of herders who had walked these mountains long before Americans ever arrived. Linnea had memorized it during their insertion 3 days ago, noting it as a potential escape route. Now it was becoming something else entirely. Halfway down, Reyes spoke again. "You never told me what happened in Syria." Linnea did not slow her pace. "There is nothing to tell. You look at that photograph every night, the one in your rifle case. I have seen you do it for 8 months, and you have never once mentioned it." The trail narrowed further, forcing them to press against the rock face as they descended. Below, Linnea could see the Ranger column moving deeper into the valley. They were maybe 4 minutes from the kill zone now. 3 years ago, she said finally. Aleppo province. We were providing overwatch for a Marine patrol. Her voice was flat, reciting facts rather than reliving memories. Contact came from the north. Heavy fire. I had a clear shot on the machine gunner who was pinning them down. What happened? I hesitated. Linnea reached a switchback and paused, scanning for enemy observation. 1 second, maybe 2. By the time I took the shot, 4 Marines were dead. Corporal Evan Thayer was the first. He was 22. He had just gotten engaged. Reyes said nothing for a long moment. Then, why did you hesitate? The question hung in the mountain air. Linnea had asked herself the same thing every day for 3 years. The therapists at Walter Reed had theories. Combat stress, target fixation, a momentary disconnect between perception and action. None of their explanations changed the fact that 4 men were dead because her finger had refused to move. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have never known. One moment I had the shot, the next moment I was frozen, like my body belonged to someone else." They reached the bottom of the trail and took cover behind a cluster of boulders. From here, Linnea could see the valley floor clearly. The Rangers were strung out along the trail, tactical spacing maintained, weapons ready. They looked professional, prepared. They had no idea they were walking into a trap that would kill them all. "It will not happen again," Reyes said. He was not asking. Linnea unslung her rifle and settled into a prone position, finding a gap between the boulders that gave her a clear line of sight to the eastern ridge. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters more clearly now. They were disciplined, patient, waiting for the perfect moment to spring their ambush. The Rangers were 2 minutes out. She found herself thinking about Captain Breslin. He was not a bad officer. She had seen him make difficult calls under pressure, had watched him mourn soldiers lost under his command. But he had a blind spot, and she was standing in the middle of it. He could not accept that a woman might see something his entire intelligence apparatus had missed. His certainty would cost lives today. 1 minute. Linnea adjusted her scope, calculating windage and elevation for the enemy machine gun positions she had identified. 3 heavy weapons, positioned to create overlapping fields of fire across the valley floor. If she could take them out in the first seconds of contact, the Rangers might have time to find cover, might have time to fight back. It was not much a plan, but it was all she had. 30 seconds. Reyes was steady beside her, his spotting scope locked on the ridge. He would call targets, track impacts, help her work through the enemy positions as fast as humanly possible. They had done this before in a dozen different hellholes across 3 continents. They were good at it. The best team in the battalion, according to the metrics that officers use to measure such things. None of that would matter if she froze again. 15 seconds. The lead Ranger squad entered the kill zone. Young men walking in tactical formation, trusting their training, trusting their leaders, trusting that someone was watching their backs. Linnea was watching. She settled her crosshairs on the first machine gun position and began to let out her breath. 10 seconds. The enemy fighters were shifting now, making final adjustments. She could see one of them speaking into a radio, probably coordinating with their commander. The ambush was moments from triggering. 5 seconds. Her finger rested on the trigger. Light pressure. Ready. The first shot came from the eastern ridge, a sharp crack that echoed across the valley like a starting gun for hell itself. Then the world exploded into chaos as 40 rifles opened up simultaneously, pouring fire into the trapped Ranger column. Linnea fired. The first machine gunner dropped. She cycled the bolt, acquired the second target, fired again. Another body falling. Reyes was calling out positions, his voice calm despite the carnage erupting below them. "Third gunner," she said, and put a round through his chest before he could traverse his weapon toward the pinned Rangers. But even as the heavy weapons fell silent, the rifle fire continued. 40 men shooting at 143. Rangers were falling. She could see bodies on the trail, could hear screaming over the distant rattle of gunfire. And then a bullet cracked past her head, close enough to feel the wind of its passage, and she heard Reyes make a sound that she would remember for the rest of her life. She turned. He was on his back, hands clutching his throat, blood pulsing between his fingers in thick arterial spurts. His eyes found hers, wide with shock, and something that might have been apology. "Danilo," she said, reaching for him. His mouth moved. No sound came out. The blood kept coming, and then his hands fell away and his eyes went still and Corporal Danilo Reyes was gone. Another round impacted the boulder beside her head. Then another. Someone on that ridge had spotted her position, and they were trying very hard to kill her. Linnea looked at Reyes one last time. Then she grabbed her rifle and started moving. The world had become a symphony of violence. Rifle cracks echoed off the valley walls, layering on top of each other until the sound was one continuous roar. Men were screaming below. Orders were being shouted that no one could hear. And somewhere on that ridge, a shooter was hunting her with methodical precision. Linnea threw herself behind a collapsed mud brick wall. Ancient stones that had probably stood for 100 years before this valley became a killing ground. Rounds impacted the other side, sending chips of dried clay spinning through the air. She pressed her back against the wall and forced herself to breathe. Think. She had to think. Reyes was dead. Her radio had taken a round during her scramble for cover. the casing cracked and sparking uselessly against her hip. She was alone, cut off, with no way to communicate and no one coming to help. Below her position, the Rangers were dying. She could hear Captain Breslin's voice somewhere in the chaos, shouting commands that were being swallowed by gunfire. He was trying to organize a response, trying to get his men into cover, but there was no cover. The enemy had chosen this spot precisely because there was nowhere to hide. Linnea risked a glance around the edge of the wall. The scene was worse than she had imagined. Bodies littered the trail. Wounded men were crawling toward rocks that offered no real protection. A young ranger, maybe 20 years old, was dragging a buddy toward a shallow depression while rounds kicked up dirt all around them. She raised her rifle. The first target was a fighter on the ridge who was pouring automatic fire into the trapped Americans. She put the crosshairs on his chest and squeezed. He dropped. She cycled the bolt and found another target. Fired. Another body falling. Returned fire immediately intensified on her position. They knew where she was now. Every shot she took painted a bigger target on her back. She did not care. Third target. A man with an RPG who was lining up a shot on a cluster of Rangers huddled behind a disabled Humvee. She fired a heartbeat before he could launch. The rocket detonated in his hands, consuming him and two fighters beside him in a ball of orange flame. The wall beside her head exploded. Stone fragments sliced her cheek, and she felt blood running hot down her jaw. Close. Too close. The sniper who had killed Reyes was zeroing in on her position. She rolled left, came up a new spot, and scanned the ridge for the shooter. There, a glint of glass among the rocks, maybe 600 meters out. He was good, patient, waiting for her to make a mistake. Linnea did not give him one. She dropped below the wall and began crawling, keeping the ancient stones between her and his line of sight. 20 meters to the east, there was a drainage ditch that might give her a new angle. If she could reach it without getting shot. The crawl felt like it took hours. In reality, it was maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds of gunfire and screaming and the wet sounds of bullets finding flesh. 90 seconds of Rangers dying while she slithered through the dirt like a snake. She reached the ditch and slid into it, immediately bringing her rifle up to scan the ridge. The enemy sniper had lost her. She could see him searching, his scope sweeping back and forth across her old position. Now she had him. The shot was clean. 612 meters, minimal wind, stationary target. She exhaled halfway, held it, and squeezed the trigger with the gentle pressure of a lover's touch. The enemy sniper's head snapped back. He slumped forward over his rifle and did not move again. One threat eliminated. 37 to go. Linnea shifted her position and began working through the remaining targets. She was not thinking anymore. Not really. Her body had taken over, running on thousands of hours of training and the cold mathematics of ballistics. Acquire target. Calculate. Fire. Cycle. Repeat. But even as she dropped fighter after fighter, she knew it was not enough. The Rangers were still pinned, still dying. For every enemy she killed, 3 more were still shooting. She needed to change the equation. A burst of automatic fire raked the ditch, forcing her flat. Someone had spotted her muzzle flash. She heard voices shouting in Pashto, coordinating. They were not amateurs. They knew how to deal with a sniper, and they were adapting. Linnea looked down at the valley floor, looked at the Rangers still fighting, still dying, looked at the ridge where the enemy held every advantage. There was only one way to end this. She had known it from the moment Reyes fell. Known it and pushed it away because it was insane. She had to take the ridge, not by sniping from a distance, not by picking off targets one at a time while more Americans died. She had to go up there into the teeth of the enemy position and break their ambush from the inside. It was suicide. A single soldier against 40 entrenched fighters. No support, no backup, no extraction if things went wrong. But if she stayed here, the Rangers would be wiped out. Every single one of them. And she would have to live with that, the same way she had lived with Syria for 3 years. More faces to carry. More names to memorize. More ghosts to see every time she closed her eyes. She thought about Evan Thayer, 22 years old, a sister in Ohio, a fiancée who never got to be a wife. She thought about the photograph in her rifle case, back at the position she had abandoned. The four faces that watched her every night. She thought about freezing, about hesitating, about the thing inside her that had broken in Aleppo and never quite healed. Below her, a young ranger took a round to the chest and fell. He looked barely old enough to shave. Linnea checked her ammunition. 14 rounds remaining. Her sidearm had 2 full magazines. It was not nearly enough. It would have to be enough. She began to move. The goat trail was her only chance. It wound up the eastern ridge in a series of switchbacks that the enemy might not be watching, a path too narrow and exposed for a conventional assault. But Linnea was not planning a conventional assault. She was planning something closer to controlled insanity. She moved fast, staying low, using every rock and scrub brush for concealment. Behind her, the gunfire continued without pause. The Rangers were still fighting, still dying, buying her time with their blood. She tried not to think about how many would be left by the time she reached the top. 50 meters up the trail, she nearly died. The round came from above, snapping past her ear close enough to feel the heat of its passage. She threw herself sideways, rolling behind a boulder as 2 more shots cracked off the stone where she had been standing. Someone was watching the trail after all. She pressed herself flat and scanned the ridge above. There, a fighter crouched behind a rock formation, maybe 200 meters up. He was repositioning, trying to get an angle on her new cover. Linnea did not give him the chance. She brought her rifle up in one smooth motion and fired. The fighter tumbled backward and disappeared over the edge of the trail. But the shot had cost her. Muzzle flash in daylight was impossible to hide, and now voices were shouting above her. Pashto commands, sharp and urgent. They knew she was coming. She started moving again, faster now. Stealth was no longer an option. Speed was her only advantage. The trail steepened, forcing her to use her free hand to pull herself up rocky outcroppings. Her shoulder burned where the earlier graze had torn through muscle, but she ignored it. Pain was just information. It could wait. 2 more fighters appeared on the trail above her. She shot the first one before he could raise his weapon. The second managed to get off a burst that went wide, and then her bullet found his throat, and he fell gurgling into the rocks. 8 rounds remaining in her rifle. 34 enemies still on the ridge. The math was impossible. She did it anyway. A memory surfaced as she climbed, unbidden and unwelcome. Syria. The moment before everything went wrong. She had been in a similar position, then elevated overwatch, clear line of sight. The Marine Patrol had walked into an ambush just like this one. She had seen the machine gunner setting up, had put her crosshairs on his chest, had begun to squeeze the trigger. And then nothing. Her finger had simply stopped working. Her body had disconnected from her mind, leaving her frozen behind the scope while 4 men died below. By the time she finally fired, it was too late. Evan Thayer was already gone. The others followed within seconds. The therapist called it a dissociative response, a trauma reaction, her brain protecting itself from the reality of taking a human life. But Linnea knew the truth. It was not protection. It was weakness, a flaw in her character that had cost 4 men their futures. She would not let it happen again. The ridge was closer now. She could hear the enemy fighters more clearly, shouting to each other as they tried to coordinate a response to the ghost climbing their mountain. Some of them had left their positions to hunt her, which meant fewer guns pointed at the Rangers below. Small victories. She collected them like coins, hoping they would add up to something that mattered. A burst of automatic fire raked the rocks to her left. She dove right, came up firing, and dropped another fighter who had been trying to flank her position. 7 rounds now. The trail opened onto a small plateau, and suddenly she could see the scope of what she was facing. The enemy position was larger than she had estimated from below. Not 40 fighters, closer to 50. They had reinforced during the ambush, bringing up reserves from a secondary position she had not detected. At the center of it all stood a man in dark clothing, older than the others, watching the battle below with the calm patience of a chess master. He turned as one of his fighters pointed toward Linnea's position. and even at this distance, she could see the intelligence in his eyes. Hakan Rahimi. She did not know his name, but she knew what he was. The commander, the architect of this massacre. He raised a radio to his lips and spoke. Within seconds, a dozen fighters began moving toward her position. Linnea looked at the approaching enemy, looked at Rahimi standing untouchable at the center of his web, looked down at the valley where Rangers were still fighting and dying. She had 7 rounds, 12 enemies approaching, a commander who needed to die, and somewhere deep inside her, the ghost of Syria waiting to freeze her finger at the worst possible moment. The first fighter came around a boulder 20 meters away. She shot him through the eye. 6 rounds. The second and third came together, trying to overwhelm her with numbers. She fired twice, dropping them both. 4 rounds. She was moving before they hit the ground, abandoning her position before the others could triangulate her location. The plateau had become a killing ground, but she was not sure anymore who was doing the killing. A round caught her in the side. The impact spun her halfway around, driving the breath from her lungs in a spray of red mist. She stumbled, caught herself on a rock, and somehow kept her feet. The pain was extraordinary, a white-hot lance that threatened to shut down everything she was. She looked down. Blood was soaking through her uniform, spreading fast. The bullet had gone through, which was good. It might have missed the vital organs, which was better. But she was bleeding badly, and there were still 9 fighters between her and Rahimi. Linnea raised her rifle. 4 rounds, 9 enemies, 1 commander, and a wound that was going to kill her if she did not end this fast. She started walking toward them. Blood was running down her hip and pooling in her boot. Each step made a soft squelching sound that she could hear even over the gunfire. The wound was worse than she had hoped, better than she had feared. She had maybe 10 minutes before blood loss started affecting her vision, maybe 15 before she collapsed. She intended to make them count. The first fighter came at her fast, AK-47 raised, finger already on the trigger. Linnea shot him through the chest at 15 meters. He fell backward and did not move. 3 rounds. 2 more emerged from behind a rock formation to her right. She pivoted, fired once, and watched the lead man crumple. The second hesitated for just a fraction of a second, surprised by how fast his companion had died. That hesitation cost him everything. Her next round took him in the throat. 1 round remaining. 6 enemies left. 1 bullet. And Hakan Rahimi still standing at the center of his position, watching her approach with something that looked almost like admiration. Linnea dropped the rifle and drew her sidearm. The M9 felt lighter in her hands, more intimate. 17 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Close quarters now. No more precision shooting from distance. This was going to be ugly. She moved toward the nearest cover, a waist-high wall of stacked stones that the enemy had built as a fighting position. 2 fighters were crouched behind it, focused on the valley below. They did not hear her coming until she was almost on top of them. The first one turned just in time to see the muzzle flash. He died with a look of confusion on his face. The second tried to bring his weapon around, but she was faster. 2 shots. Center mass. He slid down the wall and was still. 14 rounds. Voices shouting now. Pashto commands echoing across the plateau. They knew where she was, knew she was wounded, knew she was almost out of ammunition. They should have been confident. Instead, she heard something else in those voices. Fear. Good. She vaulted the stone wall and kept moving, staying low, using the enemy's own fortifications against them. The position was a maze of fighting holes and covered trenches, designed to protect against air strikes and artillery. It was never meant to defend against a single wounded woman moving through it like a ghost. Another fighter appeared in front of her. She shot him twice before he could react. Another came from the left. She spun and fired, feeling the recoil travel up her arm, watching him fall. 10 rounds. The wound in her side was screaming now, a constant pulse of agony that threatened to overwhelm everything else. She could feel herself slowing, her reactions getting sluggish. The blood loss was catching up. She found cover behind an ammunition crate and pressed her hand against the wound. It came away red and wet. Not good. Definitely not good. Through a gap in the fortifications, she could see the valley below. The Rangers were still fighting, but the incoming fire had slackened. Every enemy she killed up here was one less gun pointed at the men below. It was working. It had to keep working. She pushed herself up and kept moving. The next trench was empty. The one after that held a fighter who was trying to reload his weapon. She shot him before he could finish. 9 rounds. And then she rounded a corner and saw Rahimi. He was 30 meters away, standing in the open, a rifle in his hands. He had sent his men to hunt her, and now he was alone. Just the two of them, with the sound of distant gunfire as their only witness. Linnea raised her pistol and froze. It happened exactly like Syria. One moment she was in control, her finger on the trigger, the shot lined up and ready. The next moment her body simply stopped responding. The connection between her brain and her hand severed, leaving her standing there like a statue while Rahimi raised his own weapon. No, not again. Not now. She screamed at herself inside her own head. Screamed at her finger to move, at her hand to squeeze, at her body to do the one thing it had been trained to do. But the freeze was absolute, a wall of ice between intention and action. Rahimi was aiming now. She could see his eye behind the sight, calm and steady. He was going to kill her, and she was going to let him, just like she had let Evan Thayer die. Just like she had let all of them die. The faces flashed through her mind. Thayer, the other 3 Marines. Reyes, all the Rangers dying in the valley below. All the people she had failed because something inside her was broken. And then she saw something else. Below her position, visible through a gap in the rocks, a young Ranger was trying to drag a wounded buddy to cover. He was maybe 20 years old, with a baby face and terrified eyes. As she watched, a round caught him in the chest. He fell the same way Evan Thayer had fallen. The same surprised look, the same crumpling collapse. Something inside Linnea shattered. Not apart, together. Her finger moved. The shot took Rahimi in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle clattering to the ground. He stumbled, caught himself, and looked at her with an expression of genuine surprise. She fired again, and again, and again. Rahimi fell. Linnea stood there for a long moment, her pistol still raised, her hand trembling. The freeze was gone, broken. She did not know if it would come back, did not know if she was fixed or just temporarily functional. She did not care. There were still enemies on this ridge, still Rangers dying below, still work to do. She checked her magazine. 5 rounds remaining. She started moving again. The plateau had become a graveyard. Bodies lay scattered among the fighting positions. Men who had woken this morning believing they would kill Americans and instead had met something they never expected. A wounded woman with empty eyes and a pistol that never seemed to miss. Linnea moved through the carnage like she was walking through a dream. The pain in her side had faded to a distant throb, which she knew was a bad sign. When wounds stopped hurting, it meant the body was starting to shut down. She had minutes now, not the 10 she had estimated before. 5 rounds, for enemies remaining. And somewhere behind her, Rahimi was still alive. She had shot him 4 times, but she had seen him moving as she pushed forward, crawling toward cover. The man was harder to kill than she had expected. That would be a problem she would have to solve, but not yet. First, she needed to end the ambush. First, she needed to save whoever was left to save. The gunfire from below had changed character. Less concentrated now. The Rangers were spreading out, finding better positions, starting to return effective fire. Every enemy she killed up here shifted the balance a little more in their favor. She found the next fighter hiding behind a stack of ammunition crates. He was young, maybe 19, with the wispy beard of someone who had not yet grown into manhood. His hands were shaking as he tried to reload his rifle. For a fraction of a second, Linnea hesitated. Not the freeze. Something else. Something human that recognized the fear in his eyes and remembered that he was someone's son. Then she saw the blood on his hands. American blood, from the Rangers he had been shooting at for the past 20 minutes. She fired once. He fell. for rounds. The next two fighters came at her together, coordinated, professional. They had seen what she did to their friends, and they were not going to make the same mistakes. One lay down, covering fire, while the other advanced. Proper fire and movement. These were not amateurs. Linnea dropped behind a low wall and waited. The covering fire was chewing up the stone above her head, keeping her pinned. The advancing fighter was getting closer. 10 meters. 8. 6. She rolled left, came up firing, and put 2 rounds into his chest before he could adjust his aim. He went down hard. 2 rounds. The covering fighter saw his partner fall and made a decision. He broke from his position and ran, not toward her but away, toward the far edge of the plateau, deserting, running from the ghost who had torn through his unit like a force of nature. Linnea let him go. She could not afford to waste ammunition on a fleeing enemy when there were still threats to neutralize. 1 fighter remaining. Prulaimi. She pushed herself up and immediately staggered. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding at the edges of her vision. Blood loss. She was running out of time. Focus. She forced herself to breathe, to center, to push through the fog creeping into her brain. Just a little longer. Just a few more minutes. The last fighter was not hard to find. He was standing at the edge of the plateau, looking down at the valley with his rifle hanging loose at his side. He had stopped shooting, stopped fighting. He was just watching the battle below with an expression of stunned disbelief. Linnea approached slowly, her pistol raised. He heard her coming and turned. He was older than the others, maybe 40, with gray streaking his beard and lines around his eyes that spoke of decades of war. He looked at her, looked at the bodies scattered across the plateau, looked at the pistol in her hand. 1 woman, he said in heavily accented English. 1 woman did all this. Linnea did not respond. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The fighter raised his hand slowly, not in surrender, in something closer to acknowledgement. We heard stories, he said. Ghost in the mountains. Sniper who kills without being seen. We thought it was propaganda. American lies to frighten us. He lowered his hands and picked up his rifle, not pointing it at her, just holding it. It was not lies, he said, and then he raised the weapon. Linnea fired twice. Both rounds hit center mass. The fighter fell backward over the edge of the plateau and disappeared into the rocks below. Empty magazine. She ejected it and reached for a spare. Her fingers found nothing. The second magazine was gone, lost somewhere during her climb up the mountain. She had 17 rounds when she started. She had fired 18. The math did not work until she remembered the round already chambered when she drew. She was out of ammunition, and behind her, she heard the sound of a rifle being cocked. Linnea turned slowly. Rahimi was standing 20 meters away, swaying on his feet, blood soaking his shirt from the wounds she had given him. But his eyes were clear and his hands were steady on the AK-47 pointed at her chest. You should have made sure I was dead, he said. She had no response. No weapon. No options. She had killed nearly 50 men and saved 100 rangers, and now she was going to die on this plateau because she had not taken the time to finish what she started. Rahimi smiled. It was not a cruel smile, almost respectful. You fought well, he said. For a woman. For anyone. He raised the rifle to his shoulder. Linnea did not close her eyes. If she was going to die, she would die looking at the man who killed her. She owed herself that much. The shot echoed across the plateau. Rahimi's head snapped sideways. He stood frozen for a moment, a look of profound confusion on his face. Then he crumpled to the ground and did not move again. Linnea stared at his body, stared at the hole in his temple that she had not put there. She turned toward the valley. A ranger sniper team had reached the ridge on the far side. One of them was still looking through his scope, confirming the kill. The other raised his hand in a gesture that might have been a salute. Linnea tried to raise her hand in response. The world tilted again, more violently this time, and her knees buckled. She was unconscious before she hit the ground. She woke to the sound of helicopter rotors and the smell of blood. Her blood. It was everywhere, soaking through the field dressing someone had pressed against her side, pooling beneath her on the stretcher she did not remember being placed on. Easy, Sergeant. A face swam into view above her. Young. Scared. a medic with hands that were trying very hard not to shake. "You took a bad one. We're getting you out." Linnea tried to speak. Her mouth would not cooperate. Everything felt distant, muffled, like she was experiencing the world through a thick pane of glass. The medic was still talking, saying something about blood pressure and fluid replacement and emergency surgery. She let the words wash over her without processing them. None of it mattered. Only one thing mattered. The Rangers she managed. Her voice came out as a croak, barely audible over the rotor wash. "How many?" The medic hesitated. That hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "How many?" she repeated. 127, the medic said finally. "Out of 143. Sistenkia, 23 wounded." He paused. "It should have been all of them. Would have been if not for you." Linnea closed her eyes. 16 dead. 16 families who would get the knock on their door, the folded flag, the hollow words about sacrifice and honor. 16 names that would be added to the wall and forgotten by everyone except the people who loved them. But 127 alive. 127 who would go home to their families, hold their children, grow old with their wives. Because she had climbed a mountain and killed the men who were killing them. The math was brutal. It was also the only math that mattered in war. The helicopter lifted off, tilting as it climbed away from the plateau. Through the open door, Linnea could see the valley falling away below. The kill zone where so many had died. The ridge where she had fought. The place where Reyes was still lying, waiting for someone to bring him home. Reyes. The name hit her like a physical blow. She had not thought about him since the fighting started, had not allowed herself to think about him. But now, with the adrenaline fading and the shock setting in, she could not push him away anymore. He had followed her. When Breslin ordered them to stay put, when every instinct said to obey, Reyes had followed her down that mountain without hesitation. He had trusted her judgment over his commanding officer. He had believed in her when no one else did, and he had died for it. The medic was doing something to her foreline, adjusting the flow of whatever was keeping her alive. She barely noticed. She was thinking about Reyes's wife, a woman named Maria who she had met once at a battalion barbecue. Thinking about the son who had just turned 4. Thinking about the conversation she would have to have when she got back, if she got back, explaining why Danilo was not coming home. "I am sorry," she whispered. She was not sure if she was talking to Reyes, or to Maria, or to the 16 Rangers who had died despite everything she did. Maybe all of them. The medic leaned closer. "What was that, Sergeant?" "Nothing." Linnea forced her eyes open. She would not die on this helicopter. She would not add her name to the list of people who needed to be mourned. She had survived too much, fought too hard, to let go now. Below them, the valley was swarming with activity. More helicopters coming in, medevac birds, and gunships and transports. The Rangers were being extracted, the wounded evacuated, the dead collected. The machine of war grinding forward, processing this engagement and preparing for the next one. She wondered if any of them knew what had happened on that ridge. If they understood how close they had come to total annihilation. Probably not. That was how it worked. The people who did the saving rarely got to tell the story. The people who got saved rarely understood what it cost. The helicopter banked east, heading toward Bagram and the surgical teams waiting there. The medic was on the radio now, calling ahead with her vitals, describing the wound in clinical terms that stripped away all the horror and heroism and reduced everything to numbers. Female, mid-30s, GSW to the left flank. Through and through. Significant blood loss. BP drooping. Needs surgical team standing by. Linnea listened to herself being reduced to data and felt nothing. She was too tired to feel anything. The wound in her side had gone from numb to burning, which she supposed was a good sign. Pain meant she was still alive. She thought about Evan Thayer, about Syria, about the freeze that had haunted her for 3 years and the moment when it had finally broken. She had expected to feel different afterward. Heal, maybe. Redeemed. Instead, she just felt empty. The faces were still there. Thayer and the others. Reyes now too. They would always be there, watching her from the darkness behind her eyes. But something had changed. They were not accusing her anymore. They were just present, witnesses to what she had become. A killer, a savior, a woman who had walked into hell and walked out again, carrying as many people as she could on her back. The helicopter shuddered as it hit turbulence. The medic grabbed the stretcher to keep it stable, his face tight with concentration. Linnea barely noticed. She was looking at the sky through the open door, watching the clouds drift past, thinking about nothing and everything at once. 127, she said again. The number felt important. A talisman against the darkness. The medic looked at her. Yes, Sergeant. 127. Linnea nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Okay. She closed her eyes and let the helicopter carry her away from the valley of death. The surgical theater at Bagram smelled like antiseptic and fear. Linnea drifted in and out of consciousness as masked figures moved around her, their voices muffled by the drugs coursing through her system. She caught fragments of conversation, words like hemorrhage and transfusion and touch and go. None of it seemed real. At some point, she dreamed. She was back in Syria, lying on the same rooftop where everything had gone wrong. The sun was brutal, pressing down on her like a physical weight. Through her scope, she could see the Marine patrol moving through the narrow streets below. She could see the machine gunner setting up in the window across the street. She could see Evan Thayer walking point, his rifle held easy in his hands, completely unaware that he had 30 seconds left to live. Take the shot, someone said. It was Reyes, lying beside her, his throat intact, his eyes alive. Take the shot, Voss. She tried. God, she tried. But her finger would not move. The freeze had her, that terrible paralysis that turned her body into a prison. She watched through the scope as the machine gun opened up. Watched Thayer fall. Watched the others fall behind him. Watched everything she could have prevented unfold in slow motion while she lay there useless. Reyes was looking at her now, not angry. Saad, you could have saved them, he said. Why did you not save them? I tried, she said. Or thought she said. I tried. The dream shifted. She was on the plateau again, surrounded by bodies, but now the bodies were wearing American uniforms. Rangers. Dozens of them. All the men she had failed to save. Breslin was there, standing over her, his face twisted with contempt. Just one sniper, he said, and you could not even do that right. She tried to speak, tried to defend herself, but her mouth was full of blood. She was choking on it, drowning in it, and the bodies were pressing closer and closer until she could not breathe. Sergeant Voss. A different voice. Not from the dream. Sergeant Voss, can you hear me? She clawed her way back to consciousness. The surgical theater was gone. She was in a hospital bed, surrounded by monitoring equipment that beeped and hummed. A doctor was standing beside her, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a gentle voice. You are at Bagram Airfield Medical Center, the doctor said. You have been in surgery for 6 hours. We had to remove your spleen and repair significant damage to your intestinal wall. You lost a lot of blood. Linnea tried to process the information. Her brain felt like it was wrapped in cotton. The Rangers, she managed. The doctor hesitated. They are still conducting operations in the valley. Casualty figures are being compiled. That was not what she was asking. The ones I saved, are they okay? The doctor's expression softened. From what I have heard, you saved a lot of people today, Sergeant. A lot of families are going to get their soldiers back because of what you did. Linnea closed her eyes. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. How long? She asked. Until I can return to duty. The doctor made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been disbelief. Sergeant, you nearly died on my operating table. You flatlined twice during surgery. You're looking at months of recovery, minimum. Your military career may be over. The words hit harder than the bullet had. Her career. The only thing she had left after Syria, the only thing that gave her purpose, the only reason she got up every morning. Gone. No, she said. The word came out stronger than she expected. I'm not done. Sergeant, the doctor began. I'm not done. Linnea forced her eyes open and met the doctor's gaze. There are still people out there who need someone watching the ridgelines. I'm going back. The doctor studied her for a long moment. Whatever she saw in Linnea's eyes made her step back slightly. We will discuss it when you are stronger, she said finally. For now, you need a rest. She left before Linnea could argue further. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Linnea lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything she had lost and everything she had found on that mountain. Reyes was gone. Her body was broken. Her career was hanging by a thread, but she had broken the freeze. After 3 years of carrying Syria like a weight around her neck, she had finally pulled the trigger when it mattered. She had saved 127 lives, not because she was fearless, but because she was afraid and she did it anyway. That had to count for something. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She turned her head, expecting another doctor or nurse. It was Captain Breslin. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his uniform dusty and stained, his face haggard. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. He looked like a man who had seen things he would never forget. Voss, he said. Sir. Her voice was flat. She did not have the energy for anger. Breslin stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. He did not approach the bed. He stayed near the wall, keeping his distance, like he was afraid to get too close. I came to tell you, he said, and then he stopped, swallowed, started again. The count is final. Sistenkia, 23 wounded, 104 uninjured. Linnea said nothing. She already knew the numbers. Breslin looked at the floor. If I had listened to you, he said quietly. If I had stopped the column when you told me to. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. Yes, Linnea said. If you had listened. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that could not be unsaid. 16 men were dead because Derek Breslin had not believed a woman could see something his entire intelligence apparatus had missed. That truth would follow him for the rest of his career, maybe the rest of his life. I am sorry, Breslin said finally. The words sounded like they cost him something. I was wrong. Linnea looked at him, looked at the guilt eating him alive, looked at the man who had nearly gotten her killed along with everyone else. Yes, she said again. You were. She turned her head away and closed her eyes. After a moment, she heard the door open and close. She was alone again. 3 days passed in a haze of morphine and fluorescent lights. Linnea slept more than she had slept in years, her body demanding the rest it needed to knit itself back together. When she was awake, she stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about anything at all. It never worked. On the 4th day, they started letting visitors in. The first was a ranger she did not recognize, a young specialist with a bandaged arm and eyes that were too old for his face. He stood at the foot of her bed for almost a minute before speaking. I was in the valley, he said. When it started, I saw my whole squad go down in the first 10 seconds. I thought we were all going to die. Linnea watched him without responding. She did not know what he wanted from her. The specialist swallowed hard. Then the heavy gun stopped. Just like that. We did not know why at first. We just knew we could move again, could fight back. He paused. Someone told me later it was you. That you took out their machine gun positions in the first 30 seconds. It was not 30 seconds, Linnea said. It was closer to 45. The specialist stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a broken sound, more release than humor. 45 seconds, he repeated. You saved my life in 45 seconds. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin. Bronze, worn smooth by handling. He set it on the table beside her bed. My grandfather carried that in Vietnam, he said. Brought it home. Gave it to me when I enlisted. He told me to give it to someone who saved my life, if anyone ever did. Linnea looked at the coin, looked at the young man who had placed it there. I cannot accept that, she said. You do not get a choice. The specialist straightened, almost coming to attention. Thank you, Sergeant, for everything. He left before she could respond. After that, they came in a steady stream. Rangers who had been in the valley. Rangers who had heard the story from friends. Rangers who just wanted to see the woman who had done the impossible. Some of them talked. Some of them just stood there. A few of them cried, which made Linnea more uncomfortable than anything else. She did not know how to handle gratitude on this scale. She had spent her entire career being invisible, a ghost who did her job and disappeared. Now she was something else entirely, and she did not know what to do with it. On the 5th day, Staff Sergeant Cole Pemberton came to see her. She recognized him immediately. Fort Benning, 6 years ago. They had gone through sniper school together, competing for the top spot in their class. He had beaten her by 3 points, a fact he had never let her forget. Now he walked into her hospital room with a slight limp and a look on his face she had never seen before. "Voss," he said. "Pemberton." She tried to sit up and winced as her wound protested. "They told me you were in the valley." He nodded slowly. "Right in the middle of it. When the shooting started, I thought we were done." He moved to the chair beside her bed and sat down heavily. "I have 3 daughters, Voss. Emma is 7. Sophie is 5. Lily just turned 3. Linnea said nothing. She remembered seeing him in the valley, pinned down behind a rock while rounds kicked up dirt all around him. They were going to grow up without a father, Pemberton continued. His voice was steady, but she could see his hands trembling. "I was lying there in the dirt, watching my friends die, and all I could think about was my girls, about how I was never going to see them again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. 3 little girls with their father's eyes, smiling at the camera like the world was full of nothing but good things. "Because of you, I get to go home to them," Pemberton said. "Because of what you did on that ridge, my daughters still have a father." Linnea looked at the photograph, looked at the 3 faces that would have grown up with a folded flag instead of a father if she had stayed in her position like Breslin ordered, if she had obeyed instead of acted. "I just did my job," she said. Pemberton shook his head. "No, what you did was not in any job description. What you did was impossible." He leaned forward. "The count is 27 confirmed kills, Voss. 27 enemy fighters. You did that wounded alone with a bolt-action rifle and a pistol. There is not a soldier in this theater who does not know your name right now. 27. The number felt abstract, disconnected from the reality of what she had done. She remembered the faces of some of them. The young one with the wispy beard. The old one who had called her a ghost. Rahimi, standing over her with a rifle, seconds away from ending everything. "I do not feel like a hero," she said quietly. Pemberton was silent for a moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. Something he never would have done at Fort Benning, when they were rivals competing for points and rankings. "Heroes never do," he said. "That is how you know they are real." They sat together in silence for a long time. Outside the window, the Afghan sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, the war was still going on. Men and women were still fighting and dying and trying to survive. But in this room, for this moment, there was peace. Pemberton finally stood to leave. He paused at the door. "When you get back on your feet," he said, "look me up. My unit could use someone like you." Linnea almost smiled. "Like a ghost," she said. Pemberton grinned. "Exactly like a ghost." He left. Linnea lay back against her pillow and looked at the photograph he had left behind. 3 little girls with their whole lives ahead of them. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 5 days, she did not see the faces of the dead. She saw the faces of the living. The official count came on the 7th day. A colonel from division headquarters delivered it personally, standing at the foot of her bed with a folder full of documents and an expression she could not read. "Sergeant First Class Voss," he said, "I am Colonel Marcus Whitfield. I have been assigned to compile the after-action report for the Karengal engagement." Linnea nodded. She had been expecting this. The Army loved its paperwork, even when the paperwork was written in blood. Whitfield opened the folder. "According to our assessment, the enemy force consisted of approximately 53 fighters in prepared positions. They were equipped with crew-served weapons, RPGs, and coordinated communications. Their commander was Hakan Rahimi, a known insurgent leader responsible for at least 12 previous attacks on coalition forces." He paused, looking at her over the top of the folder. "Of those 53 fighters, 47 were killed during the engagement. 27 of those kills have been attributed directly to you. The remaining 20 were eliminated by Ranger return fire after you neutralized the enemy's heavy weapons and command structure." Linnea said nothing. The numbers were just numbers. They did not capture the smell of blood or the sound of men screaming or the way Reyes had looked at her as he died. Whitfield continued. "Additionally, Your actions directly prevented what our analysts estimate would have been a 90 to 95% casualty rate among the Ranger column. 143 soldiers entered that valley. 127 came out alive. He closed the folder. In short, Sergeant, you single-handedly dismantled an enemy ambush that should have been impossible to survive. You did it wounded, without communication support, and against odds that would have broken most soldiers. He paused. The division commander has recommended you for the Medal of Honor. The words hung in the air. Linnea stared at him. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States, given for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. She had seen it pinned on chests at ceremonies, had read citations that made ordinary men sound like legends. She had never imagined wearing one herself. Sir, she started. Whitfield held up a hand. The recommendation will go through channels. It may take months. It may not be approved. But I want you to know that what you did on that ridge is the most extraordinary act of individual combat I have seen in 30 years of service. He tucked the folder under his arm. Whatever happens with the paperwork, the men and women of the 75th Ranger Regiment will never forget what you did for them. He left without waiting for a response. Linnea lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what she had just heard. Medal of Honor. She thought about Evan Thayer, about the 4 Marines who had died in Syria because she could not pull the trigger. For 3 years, she had carried their deaths like a stone around her neck. For 3 years, she had believed she was broken beyond repair. Now, they were talking about giving her the nation's highest honor. The door opened again. She expected another officer, another report, another set of numbers to quantify the unquantifiable. It was not an officer. Maria Reyes stood in the doorway. She was small, dark-haired, with eyes that had been crying recently. She wore a black dress that told Linnea everything she needed to know about why she was Epigrom. Linnea tried to sit up. Mrs. Reyes, she said. Her voice cracked. Maria. Maria walked slowly into the room. She stopped beside the bed and looked down at Linnea with an expression that was impossible to read. They told me what happened, Maria said. They told me Danilo followed you down that mountain, that he died because he believed in you. Linnea felt tears burning in her eyes. She had not cried since the engagement, had not allowed herself to feel anything beyond the cold focus of survival. But now, looking at the widow of the man who had trusted her, the walls she had built were crumbling. He was the best spotter I ever worked with, Linnea said. The words were completely inadequate. He was my friend. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took Linnea's hand. He wrote to me about you, she said. Every letter. He said you were the best sniper in the army. He said he would follow you anywhere. She squeezed Linnea's hand. He was right. I am sorry. The tears were falling now, streaming down Linnea's cheeks. I am so sorry. If I had not left the position, if I had followed orders. If you had followed orders, Maria interrupted, 143 families would be getting letters like the one I got. She shook her head. Danilo knew the risks. He made his choice. And because of that choice, because of you, so many people get to go home. She pulled something from her pocket. A photograph. She placed it in Linnea's hand. It was a picture of Reyes and his son. The boy was on his father's shoulders, laughing at the camera. Reyes was grinning, looking happier than Linnea had ever seen him. His name is Miguel, Maria said. He is 4 years old, and when he is old enough to understand, I'm going to tell him that his father died helping a hero save 127 lives. Linnea looked at the photograph, looked at the laughing boy who would grow up without a father, looked at the man who had followed her into hell and never come back. I will make it mean something, she whispered. I promise. Maria nodded slowly. I know you will. She leaned down and kissed Linnea's forehead. Then she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Linnea alone with the photograph and the weight of a promise she intended to keep. 127 lives. She would carry that number forever, along with the 16 who did not make it, along with Reyes and Thayer and all the others she could not save. But she would carry them forward, not backward. That was all anyone could do. 2 weeks after the engagement, they finally let her walk. It was not much of a walk. 20 steps to the window and 20 steps back, with a nurse hovering nearby in case she collapsed. But it was movement. It was progress. It was proof that her body was not as broken as the doctors had feared. Linnea stood at the window and looked out at Bagram Airfield. Aircraft were taking off and landing in a constant rhythm, carrying soldiers and supplies and casualties to destinations across the theater. Somewhere out there, the war was continuing. Men and women were fighting and dying while she stood in a hospital room learning how to walk again. She hated it. The door opened behind her. She did not turn around. She had grown accustomed to visitors over the past 2 weeks. Officers wanting to shake her hand. Soldiers wanting to say thank you. Reporters wanting a story she had no intention of telling. Sergeant Voss. She recognized the voice. Captain Breslin. She still did not turn around. What do you want? She said. I came to give you something. The sound of his footsteps crossed the room. She heard him set something on the table beside her bed. Finally, she turned. Breslin was holding her rifle case, the one she had left at her original position when she abandoned the overwatch point, the one that contained her M110 and the photograph of the Syria Marines. We recovered it from Ridge Alpha, Breslin said. I thought you would want it back. Linnea stared at the case. She had assumed it was lost. Another casualty of the engagement, like Reyes and the 16 Rangers and so many other things that could not be recovered. Thank you, she said. The words felt strange in her mouth, directed at him. Breslin nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else. For a moment, he just stood there, wrestling with whatever was churning inside him. I put in for transfer, he finally said. Back to staff duty. Training command. Linnea raised an eyebrow. You are leaving the Rangers. I should not be leading men in combat. Breslin's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. Not after what happened. Not after what I almost did to them. She studied him. The guilt was eating him alive. She could see it in the lines around his eyes, the gray that had appeared in his hair over the past 2 weeks, the way he could not quite meet her gaze. He was punishing himself for the 16 dead, and he would probably keep punishing himself for the rest of his life. Part of her wanted to tell him it was not entirely his fault, that the intelligence had been wrong, that the enemy had been smarter than anyone expected, that in the fog of war, mistakes happened and good men made bad calls. But 16 families had gotten folded flags because of his bad call. 16 soldiers were never coming home, and Linnea was not ready to absolve him of that. Maybe she never would be. Good luck, she said instead, with the transfer. Breslin nodded again. He understood what she was not saying. For what is worth, he said, I submitted a statement supporting your Medal of Honor recommendation. I told them exactly what happened. How you warned me, and I ignored you. How you disobeyed orders because you knew they were wrong. How you saved my entire company because I was too arrogant to listen. He paused. You were right, Voss. About everything. I just wanted you to know that I told them that. On the record. He left before she could respond. Linnea listened to his footsteps fade down the corridor, then turned back to the window. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the Hindu Kush in shades of gold and crimson. It was beautiful in a way that dangerous things often were. She walked slowly to the bed and opened her rifle case. The M110 was inside, cleaned and maintained by someone who knew what they were doing. She ran her fingers along the stock, feeling the familiar grooves and scratches that marked years of service. The photograph was tucked into the lid, right where she had left it. For faces looked up at her. Corporal Evan Thayer and the 3 Marines who had died with him in Syria. For 3 years, she had looked at this photograph every night before she slept. For 3 years, she had seen accusation in their eyes. Now, she saw something different. She saw young men who had died in a war that was bigger than any of them. She saw soldiers who had done their duty and paid the ultimate price. She saw faces that would never grow old, frozen forever at the moment of their deaths. But she did not see accusation anymore. I'm sorry I cannot save you, she said quietly. I will always be sorry, but I cannot carry you as punishment anymore. I have to carry you as purpose. She closed the case and set it aside. Then she reached for the other photograph, the one Maria Reyes had given her. Miguel on his father's shoulders, laughing at a future he would never have. This one she propped up on her bedside table, where she could see it when she woke up. A knock at the door. The nurse, coming to check her vitals and lecture her about not overexerting herself. Linnea smiled slightly. "Come in," she said. The nurse entered, already launching into her routine warnings about rest and recovery and not pushing too hard. Linnea half listened, her eyes still on the photograph of Miguel. For years old, a whole life ahead of him. She would make sure that life meant something. She would make sure all of it meant something. That was the only way forward. 6 months later, Linnea stood in a room full of strangers and tried to remember how to breathe. The ceremony was being held at Fort Benning, in a hall that had seen generations of soldiers honored for acts of valor. Flags lined the walls. Dignitaries filled the seats. Cameras recorded everything for posterity and the evening news. She hated every second of it. The uniform felt strange after so many months in hospital gowns and physical therapy sweats. The wound in her side still ached when she moved wrong, a permanent reminder of the day that had changed everything. But she was standing. She was whole. She was alive. More than she had expected, some days. The Secretary of the Army was speaking now, reading from citation that reduced the worst day of her life to a series of sterile sentences. Extraordinary heroism, conspicuous gallantry, above and beyond the call of duty. The words washed over her without sticking. She was thinking about Reyes. They had named a training facility after him at Fort Bragg, the Corporal Danilo Reyes Sniper School. Maria had sent her a photograph of the dedication ceremony. Miguel had been there, wearing a tiny suit and holding an American flag. He did not understand what any of it meant. He just knew that people kept telling him his father was a hero. She was thinking about the 16. Their names were carved into a memorial at Camp Lejeune now. 16 Rangers who had walked into a valley and never walked out. She had memorized every name, every face, every hometown. She carried them the same way she carried Thayer and the Syria Marines. Not as weight, as witness. She was thinking about the 127. They had scattered back to their units, their families, their lives. Some of them had written to her. Some had visited during her recovery. Pemberton had kept his promise and gotten her attached to his unit once she was cleared for duty. She would be shipping out again in 3 weeks. The secretary finished speaking. An aide stepped forward carrying a small blue box. The room fell silent. Linnea felt the metal being pinned to her chest. Felt the weight of it, heavier than she had expected. Felt the eyes of everyone in the room watching her become something she had never wanted to be. A symbol, a legend, a name that would be remembered long after she was gone. She thought about the plateau, about walking toward 40 enemies with 4 rounds in her rifle, about the moment when her finger had finally moved after 3 years of being frozen. She had not done it for a medal. She had done it because 143 people were going to die if she did not. Simple math. The kind of math that did not show up in citations or ceremonies or history books. The secretary shook her hand. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. Linnea stood at attention and let it wash over her. Afterward, there was a reception. Politicians wanting photographs. Generals wanting to shake her hand. Reporters wanting quotes she had no intention of giving. She escaped to a balcony overlooking the parade grounds and let the Georgia evening wrap around her like a blanket. The air was warm and thick with humidity. Somewhere in the distance, recruits were being marched to their barracks, their voices raised in cadence. The door opened behind her. "Thought I might find you out here." She turned. Pemberton was leaning against the door frame, a drink in each hand. He offered her one. "You look like you were about to crawl out of your skin in there," he said. Linnea took the drink. "I'm not good with crowds. You are not good with attention. There's a difference." Pemberton moved to stand beside her at the railing. "But you're going to have to get used to it. You're famous now, Voss. The ghost of Karangal. Every sniper school in the country is going to be teaching what you did on that ridge." Linnea sipped her drink and said nothing. Pemberton studied her profile. "You know what I think the most remarkable part is? Not the kills. Not the odds." He paused. "You told me once that you froze in Syria. That you could not pull the trigger when it mattered." Linnea's hand tightened on her glass. "You did not freeze in that valley," Pemberton continued. Whatever was broken in you, you fixed it. Right there, in the middle of the worst firefight any of us had ever seen. That is what I cannot stop thinking about. Not what you did. How you became someone who could do it. Linnea was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph of Miguel. She had carried it with her every day since Maria gave it to her. I made a promise, she said, to his mother, that I would make it mean something. Pemberton looked at the photograph, looked at the laughing boy who would never know his father. I think you're keeping that promise, he said quietly. Linnea tucked the photograph back into her pocket. She looked out at the parade grounds, at the recruits marching in formation, at the flag snapping in the evening breeze. 3 weeks, she said. Then we deploy. Pemberton nodded. You ready? She thought about the question, thought about everything she had lost and everything she had found, thought about the faces she carried and the promise she had made and the woman she had become on a blood-soaked plateau in Afghanistan. Yes, she said, I am ready. They stood together in silence as the sun set over Fort Benning. Somewhere out there, the world was still dangerous. Men and women were still fighting and dying in places most Americans would never know existed. The war was not over. It might never be over. But Linnea Vos was still standing, still fighting, still watching the ridgelines for the threats that others could not see. If this story moved you, drop a comment about what resonated most with you. Have you ever witnessed someone rise to an impossible moment when everything depended on them? The metal weighed heavy on her chest. The wound ached in her side. The faces of the dead watched from the corners of her memory. She would carry all of it, every ounce, every name, every promise. That was what it meant to survive. She finished her drink and turned toward the door. The reception was still going. The cameras were still flashing. The world was still waiting for the hero it had decided she was. Linnea Vos straightened her uniform, touched the photograph in her pocket one last time, and walked back into the light.